All right, welcome back to class. Thank you guys for being here. Today we're going to look at another argument for the existence of God that is a little bit different than Aquinas's argument from motion, but it's also similar in that it's a cosmological argument. And this argument is called the Kalam cosmological argument, and really it's one of the most popular and long-lasting arguments for the existence of God, namely because it's rooted in classical philosophy, but also it utilizes contemporary cosmology, the study of the origin of the universe. Now, what's really cool about this argument, and once again, these arguments that we're presenting are for general theism, right? An argument that a God somewhere exists. So this argument is originally developed by Al-Ghazali, who's a medieval Islamic philosopher. But then in 1979, William Lane Craig takes it, he refines it, and he presents it to the world. And ever since then, everybody's been debating it. And so the Kalam argument, here's kind of your overview of the argument, argues for the existence of God on the basis of the beginning of the universe, right? So here, we'll do the same thing that we did with Aquinas and his argument from law of motion or change. We'll present the syllogism of the argument. We'll look at each syllogism briefly. We'll talk about the objections, and then we'll look and see what people say in response, or what Craig has said in response to these objections. And so by the end of this particular session, you'll be able to know a little bit of the background. You'll know the syllogism. You'll know the initial defenses, the objections, and the responses to those objections, so that you can have a well-rounded view of the Kalam argument. And you can decide for yourself whether you think that the argument works or doesn't work. I really do look forward to your reflection papers on the argument for sure, as I did with the ones with regards to Aquinas. All right, so with all that said, let's go ahead and jump into the argument. All right, so Kalam cosmological argument can be presented in the following way. Premise 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. And premise 3, therefore, the universe has a cause. Now remember, this is a deductive argument. So if the first premise and the second premise are true, then the conclusion, therefore, the universe has a cause, necessarily follows. What does that mean? In the words of a professor of mine that I had while I was out at Bear Valley, it is unget-aroundable. You can't avoid the conclusion, no matter what you think of it, no matter what or how you feel about it. All right. So that's the first part, are these three premises. Now, the second part of the argument, because each of these premises leads to the conclusion that the universe has a cause. The second part, which is called the conceptual analysis of the argument, goes on and it implies that the cause must be personal, powerful, timeless, spaceless, uncaused, and necessary. And given these things, it points to this transcendent being, this transcendent creator that many people identify as God. Certainly meets the qualifications to a large degree of the Christian concept of God. So right there, that's kind of your overview of the argument. Let me adjust my mic here. Now, let's go ahead and look at each premise. So let's look at premise 1. Premise 1 says that whatever begins to exist has a cause. Now, this seems very simple. This seems easy to grasp, but as we're going to see in the objections later, it's actually a premise that's more highly attacked than it used to be, which I guess is a good thing for discovery and consideration of whether the premise is true or not. So here's the first premise. The first premise asserts a fundamental principle about reality, that everything that begins to exist has a cause. And so this idea is, I would say, deeply rooted in our everyday experience. I think it's also can be established through philosophical reflection, but I also think that through scientific investigation, we can realize that premise one is true as well. So let's look at these. Let's look at our everyday experience, or maybe I could rephrase that as like our common sense intuition. We live in a world where things don't simply just pop or come into existence out of nothing. For example, a chair. A chair exists because somebody made it from materials like wood or metal. We never observe objects or entities that just spontaneously come into existence without any cause. And so, this principle, I would say this principle is not only intuitive, um, but it's also foundational for understanding the world. Think about this for a second. If things could come into existence without causes, it seems like there would be no order or predictability in the universe. And what does that do for science, right? What does that do for investigating the world, investigating the universe? Seems like that would be impossible because scientific investigation presupposes the law of cause and effect, right? So we know this from our common sense, intuition, our everyday experience. But what about philosophical reflection, right? This idea that whatever begins to exist has a cause is really based on a metaphysical principle as well, a philosophical principle that nothing cannot produce something, right? Nothing cannot produce something. So to claim that something can come into existence uncaused from nothing violates the very nature of, and here's my philosophical, uh, you know, not joke, but philosophical language here. It violates the very nature of nothing, right? Which by definition, nothing means no thing. It's a universal negation, a universal negative. No thing, by its very definition, lacks any properties or potentialities or powers, right? Therefore, nothing cannot produce anything, all right? As Gottfried Leibniz once famously asked, why is there something rather than nothing? The existence of something or anything obviously demands an explanation or a cause. So right here, we've looked at our common intuition, right? Our everyday experience. We've reflected on this particular question, this particular premise from a philosophical standpoint. But what does this do for like scientific reasoning, scientific investigation, right? We've mentioned it a little bit, but like in the contemporary scientific fields, such as quantum mechanics, sometimes people say, well, what about these virtual particles that appear seemingly out of nowhere? It's an objection that's used all the time. They appear seemingly out of nowhere, but one thing we have to realize is that these events still occur within a physical framework, and they're governed. These virtual particles appear in a space that's governed by physical laws, right? These particles don't just come from absolute nothing. In the metaphysical sense, they arise from fluctuations in what's called a quantum vacuum, the lowest level of energy in the universe. And that's far from nothing. So even these types of situations that are used, these scientific findings, continue to support the principle that whatever begins to exist has a cause. So when we look at premise one, we see that we can argue for premise one, whatever begins to exist has a cause, not just from our own experience, but also from philosophical reflection, but then also scientific investigation. All right, so that's premise one. Premise two, the universe began to exist. Now, admittedly, this is the most controversial premise of the argument. I would argue that this is the crux of the Kalam cosmological argument. If the universe did not begin to exist, the Kalam is dead to rights. Okay. So the second premise, it is the most debated, but I find it to be actually that there's strong support based, once again, grounded in philosophical reasoning, but also modern scientific evidence. This premise, the universe began to exist, it asserts and it seeks to defend, as I said before, that the universe had a finite beginning in the past and is not eternal. All right. So, how would we address this particular premise or defend this particular premise from a philosophical standpoint, right? Well, we could argue that actual infinites don't exist. And so, this is actually one of the most compelling philosophical arguments for the beginning of the universe, is that it is the impossibility of an actual infinite. Now, notice this, in reality. Notice an actual infinite in reality. So mathematicians can work with the concept of infinity in the abstract, meaning we can think about it, we can use it for particular mathematical processes and equations, but applying an actual infinite into the real world leads to contradictions and absurdities, right? So the idea of an eternal past, for example, this would entail a finite number of past events. Well, let's think about this for a second. If the universe has existed for an infinite amount of time in the past, how would we reach the present moment? Well, it seems like we wouldn't be able to. There would be no way to reach the present moment. Why? Because you're traversing an infinite sequence is impossible. There would always be one more day prior to today. Therefore, time can't extend infinitely into the past. It must have a beginning boundary or a beginning point, as some may say. So that would be a philosophical reason why we would say the universe has, or the universe began to exist, is because you can't have an actually infinite number of preceding days, or time doesn't extend infinitely into the past. So let's look at some evidence from science, some scientific evidence from cosmology. So modern cosmology provides, I think, strong empirical support for the premise that the universe began to exist. All right. Now, once again, we're trying to reason and meet the non-believer where they are, so we don't have to assert young Earth creationism here. We can just meet them where they are and assume the Big Bang model, okay? And that's what I'm doing, not saying that I believe it. I'm just asserting it for the basis of this conversation. So the most widely accepted amongst scholars cosmological model is the Big Bang. And the Big Bang points to the fact that the universe had a definite beginning, right? And so according to this model, the universe expanded from an initial singularity, a point of infinite density and temperature, right? Where both space and time came into existence. And so this discovery about the universe having a beginning is confirmed by a number of observations, right? Such as cosmic microwave background radiation, the red shift in galaxies, and even Einstein's theory of relativity, confirmed by Lemaitre and Hubble. And so all of these things suggest that the universe is not eternal, but had a finite beginning. Another piece of this puzzle is called the second law of thermodynamics, and this is another line of evidence supporting the universe's beginning. All right, now this is very important. According to this law, the second law of thermodynamics, the amount of usable energy in a closed system, which is which is our universe, as far as we know, says that the amount of usable energy in a closed system is gradually decreasing. Now, here's the question. If the universe were eternal, it would have already reached a state where a state of heat death, right, is what scientists call heat death, where all the usable energy has been exhausted. The universe would be cold, it would be dark, it would be lifeless. Now, if the universe is eternal, then why haven't we reached a state of heat death already? Well, that's a really good question, because we all know, because we're existing right now, we haven't reached a state of heat death. Well, since this hasn't happened, we can infer that the universe had a beginning in the finite past. So already, for support of premise 2, we've looked at some philosophical reasons, or a philosophical reason that an actual infinite number of things in reality cannot exist. But we've also seen these scientific discoveries that have taken place since the early 1900s that have been confirmed today. Another one would be the Borguth-Vilenkin theorem that says any universe that's been expanding throughout its history must have a beginning. That's rock solid. So what do we conclude from these two things, from these two premises? Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Well, we come to premise 3, right? Therefore, the universe has a cause. And so how do we defend this particular premise? Well, we don't really defend the conclusion. We move into conceptual analysis. And so we say, hey, given the truth of the first two premises, the conclusion obviously follows. The universe has a cause. And so given that the universe does have a cause, what kind of cause, what explanation could account for the existence of the universe? Now think about this for a second. The universe is made up of time. The universe is made up of space. Some people say space-time, and also made up of matter. And so think about, real quick, take a couple of seconds and think about what are some potential candidates as the cause for the existence of the universe. Think about that for a second. Well, we can infer that there are several key characteristics of this cause. And the first pair of characteristics would be that the cause must be timeless and spaceless. If the universe is made up of time and space, then time and space cannot create itself, right? So since the cause of the universe is not time and space, then the cause itself must be timeless and spaceless in order to create time and space with the universe. It must itself, this cause must transcend time and space to the point where it is itself timeless and spaceless. All right, so those are two characteristics of the cause. What about immaterial? Timeless, spaceless, immaterial, right? The universe is made up of time, space, and matter. Matter doesn't create itself, so it must be immaterial. But another key point to this is that because the cause is spaceless, it can't be composed of matter. Therefore, it must be immaterial. All right, and then we come to another pair of characteristics, uncaused and necessary. The cause of the universe must be uncaused, since an infinite regress of causes would lead, as we've said, to logical contradictions, right? Like the impossibility of an actual infinite. So the cause must also exist necessarily. What do I mean? It means that it does not depend on anything else for its existence. So you've got timeless and spaceless. You've got uncaused, right, and necessary. But also, this cause must be personal. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, like I'm with you on timeless, spaceless, uncaused, and necessary, but why in the world would the cause of the universe have to be personal? Well, I think the cause of the universe has to be personal because it has to have the ability to choose to bring the universe into existence. Why is that? Because abstract objects like numbers, like laws of nature, cannot cause anything. An impersonal cause would not have the ability to initiate a temporal effect. So the cause must be a personal agent with free will and capable of initiating the creation of the universe. All right, and that's a powerful point. And so these characteristics obviously and clearly align with the classical concept of God as an uncaused, necessary, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and personal being. Now notice this, and you're going to hear me say this a lot. Notice this. Ask yourself this question. When you look at this question. How many Bible verses did we use to just lay out this argument, right? We didn't use any. We didn't go and we say, okay, well, turn to Genesis 1:1, and this is the reason why you should believe in God. No, same thing with the argument from Motion by Aquinas. We didn't do that, and that's the power of natural theology. You take what can be observed, what can be reasoned to, and you say, all right, well, what's the best explanation for why we see what we see? And this is what happens with Aquinas' argument from Motion and the Kalam here in just laying out the argument. I think that that's I'm going to drive this home that it is powerful to have the ability to do this. Now, obviously, we wish every time we presented the Kalam that somebody would become a theist and then become a Christian. Well, that's not always the case because despite this argument's intuitive and I believe like philosophical strength, the Kalam does face a number of objections. So in this particular part of class, what we're going to do is we're going to examine some common objections and then offer some responses to them. And I think that that's critical because we need to be fair in our evaluation of arguments. We can't just say, here's the Kalam and there are no objections. You present this and someone's automatically going to become theist, automatically going to become a Christian. That's just not the case. So one of the main objections to the Kalam stems from quantum mechanics and what somebody will say, what your internet atheist will say, or even your sophisticated atheist, your philosophical atheist. They'll say, well, quantum mechanics shows that things can begin to exist without a cause. And fair enough, critics point to the development in quantum mechanics, things like virtual particles, quantum indeterminacy. And so what they'll say is they'll argue like, they'll say something like, not everything that begins to exist has a cause, because in these events that take place at the quantum level, like virtual particles, these things appear spontaneously and without a deterministic cause. And so this critique seeks to undermine the first premise of the Kalam cosmological argument, right? First premise is whatever begins to exist has a cause. Well, they look at these events that take place at the quantum level and they say, oh, well, some of these things don't have causes. Some of these things just happen without causes, and therefore the first premise of the Kalam is dead in the water. Well, how could we respond to this? Well, one of the things that we could say is, quantum mechanics is indeed uh, probabilistic. It doesn't suggest that things come into existence from nothing in the philosophical sense, right? So these events that take place, they occur within what I would say a pre-existing quantum vacuum, right? The quantum vacuum, and this quantum vacuum isn't nothing. It's governed by physical laws and contains fluctuating energy. And so the quote nothing that guys like Lawrence Krauss, who wrote the book A Universe from Nothing, want to talk about really isn't absolute philosophical metaphysical nothing. Um, it's it's actually something, right? So it's this equivocation on nothing, and so it doesn't undermine the nothingness that the Kalam is concerned with, right? And so the other piece of this puzzle is that um, even even quantum events have causes in the form of the underlying uh, quantum states, right? This fluctuation of energy, right? So even these, so even if these causes are uh, probabilistic rather than deterministic, it doesn't do anything to hurt the Kalam. So once again, these quantum events they don't undermine the first premise because these events still have underlying causes. It's not absolute nothingness that is the metaphysical nothingness that the Kalam argument is concerned with. So that's kind of the first objection and kind of the answer to objection one. Objection two is definitely more popular. I would be almost shocked that if in your everyday conversations with people, someone threw out there, well, what about these quantum events? What you're probably going to get as you have conversations with people is, okay, well, if everything has a cause, then what caused God? And this is once again is used in a lot of popular debates between atheists and Christians, atheists and theists. But the problem with this particular objection is that it's a misunderstanding of the first premise. So critics will argue that if the Kalam cosmological argument is true, then or is true, then it should apply to God as well. So, hey, what caused God? Maybe you're in class right now watching this video and you've been asked that question before, and maybe you haven't had a good answer for that. Well, notice that the first premise states that whatever begins to exist has a cause. Not everything has a cause. So now this distinction, I believe, is crucial to helping defend the Kalam argument accurately. The argument is specifically about things that begin to exist, meaning things that have a point in time at which they come into being. Now, as we've talked about, God as a necessary being does not begin to exist and is therefore uncaused. So God is beyond time and he is eternal. And so as the cause of the universe, God is not subject to the same conditions. How would I say this? God's not subject to the same conditions as contingent beings that begin within the universe. Also, this is a category error, right? God is uncaused, and the skeptic of the Kalam is trying to put God in the category of caused. That'd be like asking the question, what does green taste like? Well, that's a category error. I'm trying to take that which is seen and move it into that which is tasted. It's a category error. So, anyways, continuing on, like the concept of a necessary being is foundational in philosophy and theology. Such a being exists necessarily uh, based upon its own nature and cannot fail to exist. Therefore, right, it doesn't require a cause. And so that's how you can navigate the question of, well, hey, if whatever begins to exist has a cause, then doesn't that apply to God? Like, doesn't everything have a cause? Well, the answer is no, not everything does have a cause. The second premise is only about, or the first premise is only about whatever begins to exist. God is a uncaused being, therefore he does not begin to exist. All right. So on to our third objection that you will encounter most likely is the objection that the universe could simply be eternal, or the universe could simply be cyclical. And so, once again, this isn't a problem for Aquinas and the argument from motion, but it definitely is a problem for the Kalam. If the universe is eternal, then it didn't begin to exist. All right, which would undercut premise 2. So some critics suggest that the universe may not have had a beginning, and instead it could be eternal or exist in a cyclical process of expansion and contraction. And so if the universe is eternal and it doesn't require a cause, then it seems like the Kalam cosmological argument fails. And once again, I would agree with the critics that if the universe is eternal, the Kalam does fail. So what is the response that proponents of the Kalam tend to say to this objection? They say, well, hey, the idea of the eternal universe has been proposed in the past. There are good philosophical reasons, but also there's good contemporary scientific reasons that show that the universe is not past eternal. Now we've looked at these to some extent. The philosophical reasons that we mentioned before. The concept of an eternal past leads to some pretty significant philosophical problems, as mentioned before, regarding the impossibility of an actual infinite. Once again, if the universe had an infinite number of past events, it would be impossible to traverse that infinite and reach the present moment. So, given that impossibility, the universe must have a beginning. All right? So that's the philosophical reasons that we've used, but also we've noted these scientific reasons for why the universe is not past eternal. And so when we look at those and we identify those and say, well, here's the red shift, here's the cosmic background radiation, here's the second law of thermodynamics. What is the conclusion? The conclusion is based upon our our scientific evidence and our philosophical reasoning. The universe is not past eternal. It is past finite. So that is the Kalam cosmological argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, and therefore the universe has a cause. All right? Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. We looked at the conceptual analysis. We say, hey, the universe is made up of time, space, and matter. Therefore, those things can't create itself. So the universe must be timeless, spaceless, immaterial, must be powerful to bring about the universe, and must be personal, because abstract objects like the laws of nature and numbers. They don't have the capacity to create anything. Therefore, the only other possibility is that there's this personal agent that has made the free will choice to bring about the universe. So that is the Kalam cosmological argument. I look forward to your reflection papers. And so next week, we're going to dive right into the teleological argument for the existence of the universe. And what we'll see there is that there's really three options for the fine-tuning of the universe. We'll talk about what fine-tuning is. It is design, it is chance, or it is just necessarily the way that things work. So I look forward to that. Have a great week, and God bless.